Hi, this is Melissa, and this is the discussion question for week 3 using the ethical compass in crisis. Question number 1, the weight of confidentiality. What emotional weight do you carry as a professional when you make this promise to a client? So, when I first thought about this, I thought about the emotional weight of my promise of the confidentiality that has been made to the client. And then I began to think, like, there was like this internal like ethical and emotional struggle like within, and I think that's just like a common thing that professionals will have when dealing with a crisis. I also thought about having a client like Alex and just some of the inner traumas or turmoils that he was dealing with. I thought about how he had like the possession of threat within to possibly hurt himself or another person. I also thought of him like as an individual, and then I couldn't help but think of myself as a future professional. And just as his story unfolded in our case study, I thought about how counselors just hold this heaviness. It's a balancing act of the ethical obligation that we have as future professionals, also while maintaining the trust with the client and ensuring safety for all. I also thought about how like some disloyalty or even betrayal could come creeping in. And I thought about that especially as the relationship is building with the client, that the client could leave. The client could be like, I don't trust you. And so I also thought how like I would have to use my best judgment. I also thought about my own anxiety. Like it could be professionally traumatic. And then I guess just as I did some further thought for question 1, I was just thinking how if a really good job is done in the beginning, our clients are warned of their limits to their confidentiality, and in the informed consent that we created and through that process, it states how I guess it could help manage maybe some of the expectations from the very beginning with what is mandatory for reporting, and that is self-harm or the harm of someone else. And so it was just really good to think about it, really heavy stuff. And I'm sure my thoughts will just continue to evolve. Number 2, using the ethical compass in crisis. How does this model help anchor you and your emotional response in a high-stakes moment like this? So it made me stop and think about the ethical decision-making model steps that are just created to ensure and navigate situations that are complex like Alex's. So it gives us a clear guide to counselors' actions as a future professional. In a high-stakes crisis, it really is created to maintain legal and ethical duties of the professional, but it also is created when dealing with like emotional response. And the steps that I would use and follow are identifying the problems. So one of the ones we saw in this is Alex and his suicidal intent to harm with a gun, either himself or Chloe. And then just there's like the ethical dilemma within, right? To maintain confidentiality. And that is just to protect Alex and Chloe, as we learned. And then just being the mandatory reporter because of the self-harm that was mentioned. And then I think another step that would be really good is definitely to review the laws and ethics of the ACAs and the ethical code, specifically B.2A, which is the serious and foreseeable harm clause. So then just moving on, like seeking some consultation, talking to your supervisor, just to ensure that any like ethical and legal issues are just fully understood. And then I was thinking like about brainstorming and the course of action in that, as you know, the confidentiality, contacting authorities, creating a safety plan with Alex if that is the thing to do, and just identifying any other targets or things that could be missed. And then listing some consequences, right? And this goes for the client as well as the professional. It's breaking that confidentiality. It's letting the authorities know and letting Chloe know. And there is the risk, right? It is a consequence to damage that therapeutic relationship. And just then it, like, just prevents maybe that relationship going on or anything like that. Of course, keeping in mind any like legal consequences and things like that. And then I think you just have to decide the course of action and act. And so that is acting ethically and legally to act with actions that just ensure safety, and to like make it very clear that harm, you're there to protect from harm, even when like the breaking of confidentiality has happened. You're there for safety and to prevent harm. The anchoring the emotional response piece of this question, it really does help the counselor. And as I learned, it just provides kind of a roadmap to help the counselor with maybe the overwhelm that they're dealing with in the crisis. It promotes the objective, right? What's the goal? And that just requires the review of the ethical codes, and it just encourages reasoning over like what could be an emotional reaction. You could be feeling feelings of loss or feelings of broken trust and things like that. And then of course just following the legal guidelines with compliance. And that really just ensures, I learned, counselors that their actions are legally upheld and that ethically things are being done with an accuracy. And then that can help reduce the anxieties about any possible repercussions, that could come from a high stakes crisis. And then maybe some of the duties that could be fulfilled are just reinforcing the ethical duty of all of it. And I think it's the main goal of the therapist or the counselor professional, and that is to save lives and to prevent harm, and obviously to preserve any relationship that you can with some dignity for the client, in this case Alex. I think that the third part of our question was the human connection in crisis, and it is, how would you communicate your decision to Alex, knowing his trust in you might be shattered or broken? And with that one, I really think, like, as a counselor professional, I would have to communicate the safety first piece, and then share through maybe like some framing of different actions being presented with like a care as a professional, but also with just sharing that it's not like a personal distrust and things like that, just to keep that piece of care there. And I think one way that I would share is I could just be like, Alex, my actions today are about saving a life and preventing harm, not punishment. Could be one statement. Or I think another one that would be really great is, we can work through this together, but first we need to make sure everyone is safe. And I think it's I like dove into this discussion this week. I can just see how communication could be direct. It needs to focus on safety. It provides action, but yet it is very empathetic and clear. I think in this case, I would definitely involve Alex in the steps of what we're next. And that could be working with emergency services, that could be working with a crisis response team, or any other things that could be available in the community, or resources from a supervisor. That's it for my week 3 discussion. Thank